maybe moving on to something else. Like I'm a software developer at heart, um, and I'm trying to understand like when a CIS benchmark conversation comes in front of software developers, and especially small to medium companies. What we see is a software developer is doing multiple jobs. They're not just a software developer; they're also an infrastructure engineer. I mean, they'll end up doing security configurations, trying also to meet all the ISO controls, NIST controls. What's the benefit of CIS benchmark for a software development team? Let's say you're in a small to medium enterprise. I'm just trying to understand that, like, what benefit does it bring to the table?
So you've struck the nail on the head there, right? One of the reasons why we don't have as much control over cloud as we felt we did over physical infrastructure is back then you had your infrastructure guy, you had your developer.
Yeah.
Developer wants more infrastructure. Infrastructure says, clean your code, right?
Yeah.
They clash, we come out with it. So changes can't happen on infrastructure without this guy agreeing to it, and it needs to be agreed to. Now, as you so rightly put, a developer is not just a developer anymore, right? They're also the infrastructure guy, but they don't necessarily have the infrastructure background to understand the upstream or downstream impacts of what that checkbox does. You know, it may have let the authentication work, but you don't know what else it's done necessarily, right? So assessing your environment against things like a CIS benchmark, as an example, right? You don't just do these once, right? You need to do these periodically because these settings can change.
Yeah.
And there's lots of people now that have the power to change them. As an example, and this is something that we see a lot, you'll have an environment that's been configured, it's best practice, it's very secure, and you've got a server workload sitting in Azure, let's say, and you've done your assessment and you've got a clean report. And you go to bed at night sleeping well, thinking, I'm in a sweet place. What you don't know is one of your developers was having some problems authenticating with another service. So he's jumped on just for troubleshootings to rule out any sort of firewall blockages, put an any rule on, because that's the only way he knows to remove anything. He's going to remove it 100%. He's going to get rid of it once, but it works. Everybody's happy. He's met his deadline. That setting stays there unless he deliberately removes it. We see it over and over again, right? So now we've got anyone on the internet accessing any port on your server workload. You need to pick that up, right? And that's one of the benchmarks or one of the configuration items that CIS is looking for. So if you're running this on a regular basis, as opposed to just once a year, it's going to A, highlight that, and B, as you do it and you're picking up developers, because if you find that setting, you need to know who made it, because there's a bit of an investigation that needs to happen now. The development team sort of upskill as well, right? Because they start to understand what I did wasn't appropriate and I can't do it again, right? And if that happens on a recurring basis, it's a lot easier for that point to get made with a development team, as opposed to a one-off yearly report that might pick these things up after you've already had a port open for 9 months.
That's a fantastic tool, because I think especially with small, full stack development teams, they've already got a huge workload of managing different software stacks. I think something like a CIS benchmark scan kind of running against their infrastructure and helping them, fix any vulnerabilities. I think, I can see the benefit for that. How do you see large organizations in your view? So for example, companies that have probably more than 200 plus developers, do you see them also adopting like CIS benchmarks? Is it mostly in the development team or the infrastructure team? I'm guessing it's more on the infrastructure team because they take that responsibility when you have a large organization. Well, and how do they inform developers that, look, we're implementing these practices?
Here's the thing, right? And I think this is where a degree of separation is healthy, be it within your organization or utilizing the services of a third party like Stickman or many others, to take that role on, right? You've got to trust that your administrative team and your development team are doing the right thing at the end of the day, right? I mean, they hold the keys to the kingdom. If there was any malicious intent there, you've got a problem anyway, right? So you've got to trust that they're doing their jobs, but you've got to verify it, right? And that's the great thing about the CIS benchmark. So you've got two options. You have the team responsible for the configuration running the benchmarks. And they find issues. You've got to ask yourself, with human nature and just the way people work, how high up the chain is that issue going to be reported? Or do they just fix it and make it go away because they don't necessarily want their boss knowing that they they implemented a setting that
Yeah.
the CEO insisted they implement because it was causing him some harm,
Yeah.
and he's just done it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got a third party doing it, or even a third party within your own business with no sort of tie into that team, what you've got is a report where they're able just to report as is.
Yeah.
And now you're learning, okay, well, why was that setting changed? And it's changed because there's no line drawn with the CEO in terms of what he can or can't request from IT and by what method he should request it.
Sure.
So by finding these things, it's a learning experience, right? You get to learn, okay, what went wrong that allowed that to happen. So now you're starting to improve non-technical processes in the background, which makes it less likely that those sorts of things will happen again. So, I don't think it's a developer role. I don't think it's an infrastructure role. I think it's a third-party verification role that should happen on a recurring basis.
Now I get your point. I think I now get it, because I think once again, when we look at things like ISO implementation in organizations, or when people are trying to get that certification, even if you have a small team, you assign someone within the team to take that responsibility and reach that certification. So what you're saying is that even for CIS benchmarks, what you want to have is an independent someone who's looking at it independently, applying it objectively, achieving security goals, so that you're just running a very secure infrastructure, and someone can take an independent view of it rather than sitting just in the development. They should understand what developers want. They should understand what infrastructure wants, but it's the same level as how you achieve compliance and certification. So this is another mechanism that you want to include in your compliance and certification process.
100%. As an example, the example we talked about previously, do I have a 30-day password expiry, or do I have a no password expiry?
No password,
right?
Yeah.
That's not your IT administrator's call, right? That arguably is a broader business, possibly even a risk team call.